Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today to hear about a couple of case studies from Peru and Belize around how these different organizations are working with their partners and stakeholders on the ground to help support them during the COVID-19 pandemic. So for those of you who I don't know, my name is Jessie Marsh. I'm the global coordinator for the FIP Community of Practice. And we are joined today by Chris Giordana from Future of Fish and James Foley from TNC. So they will be our presenters for today. So we'll have Chris's presentation will be first. We'll have about 10 minutes for him to present, followed by about 15 minutes of Q&A. And then we'll move to James for his presentation on TNC's work in Belize. So just as a reminder to folks, if you do not have a question, if you could just keep yourself on mute to minimize background noise. And we are recording the webinar, so that we'll be able to share it with others who weren't able to join us today. With that, I will turn it over to Chris.
Thanks, Jessie, and thanks everyone for taking some time out of your day to sit in and listen to us and kind of like our experience responding to COVID-19 on the ground. I work, as Jessie said, with Future of Fish, and our country where I was before the pandemic was Peru. Unfortunately, had to be evacuated back home. The situation still is quite grave there, so I'm hoping that there is some access to better medical and health care on the ground as soon as possible. The news came out earlier this week that there's only 4 ICU beds available within the largest city in Peru, Lima. So the situation is quite grave from a health standpoint. But that said, I would like to talk to you a bit about what we have been doing and how we continue to respond to this crisis. To start, a little bit of orientation to our organization, Future of Fish. We work, at least I like to say, primarily within supply chains, value chains. We look basically to intervene from an intermediary place or an intermediary perspective, articulating actors with one another to promote the position and the voice of fishing communities within their respective supply chain. Our key main mechanisms of intervention are through financial tools, providing access to finance, working with actors to promote the consumption of their specific product or to differentiate their product within the supply chain, and finally within a broad umbrella that we like to call data modernization, which basically implies a coordination of data use and the production of data between different system actors, be they private, public, or from the nonprofit sector. So the outline for my presentation today is first to kind of touch on the fishery and the FIP. Second, dig a bit deeper into our specific response to COVID-19. Talk about a little the impacts of our work so far, and finally provide a bit of advice to others that might want to replicate or implement something similar. And I will, before moving forward, say I function better when people ask me questions. So I'm very much looking forward to that 10-minute session that we have at the end of the presentation. And I hope what I kind of cover today is enough to spark some very pressing and pointed questions from everyone attending. So the FIP itself is with Mahi. In Peru, it's called Perico. In other parts of Latin America, it's known as Dorado. And this fishery is one that extends along the entire coast of Peru. The FIP itself is led by WWF, and in concert with WWF, we came into Peru in the mid 2010s, basically to evaluate the fishery from traceability aspects, understanding how the FIP was functioning and where were there opportunities for improving traceability and data modernization within the fishery. And we, after being intrigued, decided to stay a bit longer and see what other value could be unlocked within the fishery so that the well-being and the livelihoods of the actors involved is improved. The FIP itself currently is, as reported on Fishery Progress, has a progress rating B, and ideally there will be really good news in the next update. But the FIP is in the stage 4, and it started about 2013. But that said about the FIP itself, to think about the fishery in its entirety, we're thinking usually there's about 49,000 tons of mahi landed every year. The fishing zone, so where these fishers go, is outwards of 200, 300 miles basically in high seas. And in every trip, there's about 7 to 10 crew workers and 1 captain. These trips can last up to 25 days. So most fishers have 1 trip a month. And to get to where they're going and to come back usually takes about 5 days. In every trip, the fishers leave with about 25 tons of ice and return back generally with at least 10 tons of mahi. It requires 10 tons to make a trip profitable. But that can range upwards to 32 tons depending on how lucky the fisher and the crew are. The main fishing art that is used is longline, and it's non-mechanized. Within Peru, in order to be classified as artisanal, you cannot use mechanical ways of either putting the gear into the water or retrieving it. So we have crew workers on the boats in the high seas in perhaps less than desirable conditions, pulling in hand after hand with gloves on mahi that can range up to 6 or 7 kilos each. And the reason why this table is up here is there's an important thing to understand about this FIP. Not that it makes it unique, but it's rather interesting that the fleet that fishes mahi also happens to fish another species that's in a distinct and different FIP, which is the Humboldt squid FIP. And what occurs in Peru really is a switching between gear types throughout the course of the year. When mahi's in season, fishers generally go out to fish mahi when prices are high or when mahi is fairly easy to reach, so when trips are shorter. And when that's not possible, fishers then switch their gear and practices and go and fish squid. But thinking about beyond the fishery itself, or at least the boats and what people are doing out at sea, it's made up of hundreds and thousands of communities and fishers along the entire coast. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see a map of Peru, and every spot where there's a purple is where mahi is landed, and the light blue colors are where squid is landed. So these fisheries are happening, and or this fishery extends along the entire coast of the country. But our work as Future Fish really concentrates in one key area, which is in the area of Paita, in the north, along the northern coast of Peru. And we're currently engaging the community of La Isla, La Tortuga, Yasila, and the city of Paita, where most of the landings occur. And these communities have been in the area for 6,000, 7,000 years. In the left-hand portion of the screen, you can see an example of some of their boats, and the rafts that you see there in front are the traditional practice where of fishing for these communities. And it's only recently that there has been a significant investment into the growth of both the squid and the mahi fleet. Now, to think about where this product goes, so we have upwards of 4,000 fishermen fishing along the coast. That's a lot of fish landed, be it mahi or squid. The annual value generated for mahi is $88 million, and that's when we made this report, which was in 2016, 2017, represented about 50% of the global volume of all mahi landed. And the estimated informal portion of landings is about 60% of that is informal. And the interesting point for mahi, at least, is that it goes both to the national and the international market. And specifically, about 40%, according to our calculations, actually goes internationally, while 50 to 60% stays in country. So mahi is landed by the fishers, and there's this vast domestic network and value chain, basically moving product either internationally or nationally, depending on the current price, the precio en playa. Now, to engage this space, we have 4 programs currently going on in Peru. One is promoting the sustainable consumption of seafood. The second is working with the communities that we engage in the north around improving local capacity, knowledge, and eventually that leading to improved access to finances through legalization and moving from an informal to a formal situation. We're also engaging these fishers in quality and commercialization, basically improving the quality of their product so that at least the communities that we're working in are able to differentiate their mahi from other landed mahi landed in other communities, and that then giving them a position to either ask for or achieve a higher price internationally or nationally. And finally, something new that we added on was work in health and decent work. So our response to COVID was first to call the fishers and ask them what they need. They really told us 2 key things were occurring. First, a significant need for stable income, and second, for improving their working conditions on board the boats. We also pushed for telling the story at a national and international scale. And finally, we sought to reframe the work that we did in country to start engaging different ways of thinking about working with FIPs. First, thinking about adaptive capacity and the resilience of these communities, understanding how sometimes a FIP might expose or increase the teleconnected vulnerability of a fishing community, and also a significant need to balance the supply chain between the international and the domestic market. And the impact we've had based on this work, first in addressing the need, is we did 2 workshops on direct sales with fishers. We created with a set of communities about 6 Facebook sales groups, which at the height of the pandemic were moving somewhere between 300 to 500 kilos, which isn't that much, but it was something important for the fishers maintaining their income a week. And we also supported the national launch, coordinating with the government, their launch of RappiPez, which is an online platform for direct sales. We also were working with fishers to improve their working conditions. We were able to deliver PPE to 8 communities and have, to this date, benefited around 7,764 fishers. And we also supported a campaign called Pesca Libre de COVID-19 with other actors. And that is one key thing, the need, at least in the front of a pandemic like this, to respond and articulate with others so that there's one voice and all the information that fishers need is found in one location. And our work in telling the story had 2 different scales, a national and an international. On a national scale, we worked with local journalists to put out 3 articles on the impact of COVID in the fishing communities of the Mahi and squid FIP. We were able to work with a technical group led by the regional government to put out 2 reports and surveys based on or the impact of COVID, one specifically on the livelihoods of fishers, and the other looking at the conditions that were occurring at landing sites. That's one thing that we saw. There was less focus placed on landing sites and potential grouping points, and more emphasis placed on livelihoods, which from a public health standpoint, and from our perspective, seemed a little erroneous. We also worked on putting together some workshops at a national level on the impact of COVID on small-scale fisheries in Peru, promoted a national campaign to eat more fish from small-scale fishers. And internationally, we were able to coordinate with Mongo Bay to put an article out on small-scale fisheries needs, working with international actors and universities, put together 2 journal articles on the impact of COVID within the Mahi fishery. And finally, working with Coastal Roots, we were able to put out a podcast that was highlighting the experience of the fishers in the Mahi fleet. And finally, to touch on very briefly how we reframed our work. Before Future Fish, we very much focused on ourselves as a system intermediary, looking for shared value chains and multi-stakeholder solutions. But what we really learned from the experience from COVID-19 is that there needs to be an additional pillar to what we do, which is resilience and opportunity. Understanding basically, or ensuring that the communities we engage in have their basic needs met, and that they have the tools and knowledges necessary to be able to respond to market shocks or other shocks that may occur in the near future, especially within the context of climate change. Finally, for advice, I don't particularly have clear advice for anyone. I wish it was more, at least from my perspective, I wish there was something that I could say concrete to support and help you all better understand how we responded, at least in what you might do. More than anything else, the key things for us were first talking to the fishers and the communities that we engaged with, making sure that anything we did aligned with their needs and would benefit them. And the second piece, honestly, is ensuring that you articulate and work with as many other actors as possible, especially those that may not have an expertise in fisheries, but have skills and knowledges around sanitation or public health that we needed at this time to respond to the crisis.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris. It was really interesting and informative, I hope, for everyone on the line as well. I'm going to go ahead and make James the presenter here. Okay, James, you should have the ability to share your screen. There we go.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Jessie, for inviting me to present today. I hope you can see the title screen of my presentation. Okay, great. All right, so and thank you all, everyone who has joined this call, for taking the time as well. I'm here basically to give you a brief summary of how COVID-19 has impacted the Belize lobster and conch fisheries in Belize, focusing on the impacts of the Belize Spiny Lobster Fishery Improvement Project and what has been done to date to respond to these impacts to ensure that the FIP that we have in Belize continues to achieve its objectives for long-term ecological and socioeconomic sustainability of this fishery. A bit of background: Belize is a small country on the Caribbean coast of Central America. It comprises approximately half of the Mesoamerican Barrier Reef, and it has a small-scale artisanal fishery that directly employs just over 2,700 commercial fishers and about 15,000 people indirectly, netting approximately an average of $12.5 million annually, ranking fisheries fifth in Belize's GDP, with lobster being the single most valuable commodity. The managed access system began in 2011, that gives exclusive access to defined fishing areas for licensed fishers. Here you can see the 9 managed access fishing areas of Belize. Each fisher is licensed to operate in a maximum of 2 of these zones. Lobster and conch are harvested throughout the reef and inshore areas throughout Belize's territorial waters. And there are a number of day fishers across the country, a significant number, that use fiberglass skiffs to do a combination of trap, shade, and free dive fishing in different areas. There's also the sailboat fishers, pictured here, which are largely based out of Sartaneja and some from Belize City, that travel large distances along the reef, as shown in the red dotted lines there. And they use kayaks and hook sticks. These vessels can carry 8 to 12 fishermen. They typically take about 7 to 10 days per trip, landing their product in Belize City at one of the 2 co-ops or private companies. Another part of the fishery comprises the trap and shade camp fishers, who use semi-permanent camps on Turnef Atoll and have an informal ancestral territorial rights system. Each camp crew deploys traps and shades in shallow seagrass beds adjacent to their fishing camps, hauling their traps every 2 weeks or so using hook sticks and increasingly nooses to capture lobsters from shades. There are approximately 40 fishing camps in Turnef, accounting for a significant portion of the product that's landed in Belize City, 30 kilometers away. Products landed at one of 4 processing plants. About 95% of all landings are exported. There's also a small portion that goes directly to hotels and restaurants, at least in the pre-COVID era, and there is some black market activity. Now, Northern Cooperative, pictured in the top left there, serves approximately 900 member fishers and receives about 40% of all landings. National Co-op on the top right serves over 500 member fishers and receives about 30% of all landings. And the remainder is landed with 2 recently established private companies, that's Fine Catch and Rainforest Seafoods, which in recent years has led to an aggressive price war threatening the long-term sustainability of the co-op model. In 2018, the Nature Conservancy, in partnership with Future of Fish and National Fishermen Producers Cooperative Society Limited, aka National, facilitated electronic traceability system for the small-scale artisanal spiny lobster and queen conch fisheries that supply National. The aim of this system was to reduce operational costs by modernizing administrative processes, create a data-rich fishery that supports effective co-management and preservation of stocks, and pave the way towards opening new markets for their marine products. And prior to the pandemic, early in 2019, TNC partnered with National and Northern Cooperatives, Future of Fish, along with private and government sector partners to implement a combined triple impact fisheries improvement project with Future of Fish's Fishery Development Model, known as FIP plus FDM. This FIP began in May of 2019, and until March of 2020, it was progressing as planned. We had 2 major stakeholder co-design workshops held in May and September in 2019 to develop the FIP work plan. And the FIP steering committee was established and had held 3 meetings. Blue Ventures was selected as the FIP coordinator through a competitive bidding process, and an implementation strategy, including the formation of 8 individual FIP task forces, had begun. This is the overall framework for the implementation of the FIP. The FIP work plan can be divided into 4 broad areas of work: socioeconomic benefits, policy and legislation, science and technology, and FIP communications. The original strategy was to launch 8 task forces simultaneously to tackle the different work silos. Each task force, comprising relevant stakeholders representing industry, government, NGOs, and academia, was to meet regularly to strategize and coordinate implementation of specific activities contributing to the larger objectives of the FIP work plan. When COVID-19 hit Belize in mid-March of 2020, it threw the entire FIP process into confusion due to major and enduring uncertainty for all participating organizations to the FIP, representing the industry, government, and NGOs. regarding their own respective capacities to continue being involved in the FIP. It was difficult to proceed with as initially planned due to impacts on people's movement and partnering organizations' capacity. And additionally, many new needs emerged that required different strategies than those developed over the previous 9 months. Short-term needs focused around social and economic impacts that needed to be addressed before the ecological ones. So the interventions that I will describe have regardless enabled us to receive a first rating on fisheryprogress.org of a C, which we consider to be a solid achievement considering the difficulties that we have faced from the pandemic. There's a link there to our to the FIP on fisheryprogress.org. You can ask me for that later if you would like. So after emerging from the initial crisis, TNC and its FIP partners, Future of Fish and Blue Ventures, conducted a comprehensive industry-wide assessment of short, mid and long-term needs for fishers and co-ops, ranging from direct needs to support fishers' livelihoods, spearheaded by Blue Ventures, through to global market analysis conducted by TNC and Future of Fish to chart the way forward for Belize's conch and lobster and conch fisheries. The three organizations also explored in depth the range of potential scenarios that the industry may be facing upon the 15th of June opening of the lobster season relating to COVID, fisher security, government responses, cooperatives business strategies, effects on NGO capacity, effects on the international supply chains and markets, and also to look at potential opportunities for domestic market development. Adaptive strategies were drafted for the most likely scenarios to ensure a state of preparedness when the true situation going into the open season was known. And this scenario planning exercise helped us to adapt the existing FIP strategy to continue to align with its objectives of ecological and socioeconomic sustainability of the fishery. So leading up to the June opening of the lobster season, there was widespread uncertainty over the direction of lobster and conch fisheries that they would take this year. And earlier in the pandemic, market experts agreed that the market for lucrative seafood had all but evaporated. For example, 600 of restaurants that one co-op supplies in the USA, of those 400 had closed, the other 200 were following social distancing measures, resulting in 25% of previous capacity. There was a predicted shift away from lucrative food service industry towards lower value retail and delivery, and lower volume than normal. And in other producing countries in the Caribbean, the export market for spiny lobster was already experiencing a 30 to 40% drop in value and 40% reduction in volume. Surplus product in the USA left over from unused stock during the lockdown in the USA further reduced the immediate demand, and global supply chains were appearing to crash all over the place, and it was projected it would take years to rebuild the infrastructure. All of this would represent perhaps a 50% or greater reduction in fishermen's incomes compared with previous years. So the pandemic, as I said, hit Belize in March 2020 during the lobster close season. Meanwhile, the conch season closed early due to quotas being met already, and most fishers were prepared not to fish again until the June reopening of the lobster season, customarily supplementing their incomes by operating marine tours. But lack of fisher awareness of the impacts of COVID-19 on international markets and tourism left fishers unprepared for the substantial drop in value of lobster and loss of tourism income. Severe economic hardship followed in many fishing communities, and when the lobster season reopened in June 2020, trust broke down and anger increased among fishers, convinced that cooperatives were taking advantage of the pandemic to reduce prices. Many began landing product with private companies with capital reserves to continue the price war, exacerbating the financial problems of cooperatives. And as the season began, co-ops struggled to maneuver around lockdowns, social distancing restrictions, and emerging COVID-19 related concerns over food safety. It became apparent from our supply chain impact research and the community needs assessment conducted by Blue Ventures that in order to ensure the continuance of the FIP long term, we would need to prioritize social and economic needs resulting from the pandemic. We also needed to adapt to a virtual environment for the FIP, Zoom. TNC, Future Fish, and Blue Ventures undertook a major FIP reprioritization exercise, both for activities and task forces, that resulted in the prioritization of 4 FIP task forces: the communications, tech-based enforcement, co-op membership benefits, and marketing and finance, recognizing that ecological objectives could not be achieved without first addressing immediate socioeconomic impact on fishers and supply chains. So the communications task force prioritized fisher communications to, I should say, is prioritizing fisher communications to dispel information on price reductions or misinformation, to provide guidance on COVID safety while fishing, for example, this poster that's been produced, and also to support other communications around impacts of COVID on the fishery. A communications coordinator has now been hired to oversee those communications with assistance from a small grant from WWF. The marketing and finance, the tech-based enforcement task force is overseeing the piloting of the vessel monitoring system in Belize, spearheaded by WCS, the Wildlife Conservation Society. We are working on strategies to expand electronic traceability to other producers in Belize and increase the use of the spatial monitoring and reporting tool, SMART, that enforcement teams are using on water to record infractions, and an overarching objective to link these systems to increase the integrity of a storied fish approach, demonstrating responsible fishing practices that produce high quality product. The marketing and finance task force has a goal to pursue a common finance and marketing vision and strategy. That it seeks the creation of a market consortium and to position Belize lobster locally and globally, and use a pilot proof of concept project to launch the strategy. Consultants have been hired also to conduct institutional strengthening assessment of national cooperative that has enabled aspects of governance, accounting and finance, upgrades, management capacity, operational efficiencies, revisions of food safety, HACCP regulations to incorporate COVID considerations. All of these things have become top priority since the COVID pandemic has affected the industry. And we're planning to do the same for Northern in the coming year, so that we can improve and strengthen the cooperative model now at a national level. So the results of this are that now we have the four prioritized task forces up and running. There's a focus on business planning and institutional strengthening with the co-op model to improve capacity to provide member benefits and incentivize responsibly caught product, and to increase the resilience of the co-op model to private competition and climate change. There's been an enhanced capacity of the FIP participants to adapt to future threats as a result of the shared experience we've all been through. And the fishery progress of a C rating, the C rating of fishery progress, is already attracting new industry investment into the FIP to support the above objectives. So again, I'm not sure how much advice I can give that would apply to your FIPs, only that in a general sense, there was a great sense of urgency at the beginning of this pandemic, and some maybe aspects of jumping the gun on implementing maybe poorly planned responses. It's important to stop, think, and act, as Paddy says, the dive training organization. Research your true impacts and avoid assumptions. I was even guilty of this myself. Assuming certain impacts, it's important to really take a step back and assess what your impacts truly are, who's impacted, how, what help they need, and who has the capacity to provide that, how it will be funded, how long it will take, what resources will be needed. And then I think that we were all concerned at the beginning of having to transition to a virtual implementation of the FIP, but there's been many advantages of that and many cost savings that can help to support financially other areas of the FIP. It's really important to have effective communications to ensure that all your stakeholders are kept up to speed. That's why we prioritize, above all, the communications task force, and it's important to seek business-driven incentives to effect lasting change in your fishery that will make it resilient to not only COVID, but also climate change and other private company competition. So thank you very much. I'll hold it there and take any questions.
Great, thanks so much, James.